So I hope the cicadas are not too loud. We'll try to keep the microphone close to my mouth like this so we can talk about the long awaited for ehex phex debate. You know, as the OG advisor, I keep getting asked the same question over and over again. It's all about, what do you think is happening? How are people going to know the difference between ehex and phex, and what is the difference? So let's talk about ehex phex for a little bit. We've got the original launch of HEX that happened on Ethereum a few years ago, almost 3 years ago, give or take. And that was for almost 3 years. HEX. That was HEX for 3 years. And then all of a sudden, Richard Hart said, look, we're paying a lot of fees. It's unfair. Okay. It wasn't supposed to cost this much to stake and unstake HEX. Okay. So he decided that we're better off as a community having our own chain that made HEX more efficient and gave people the true capability or the true mechanism that HEX was built for, which included the ability to onboard people for cheap and the ability to have multiple stakes ending every year and not have to worry about paying too much for gas. So for people who are looking at HEX with its original design in mind, it may have become unaffordable when the Ethereum consensus, well, probably Vitalik and friends, let's say, decided to make certain kinds of transactions more expensive, let's say, okay? Because that type of transaction, which is used to unstake HEX specifically, those transactions became much more expensive than they were when HEX launched, okay? So there is a reasoning behind the launch of PulseChain and phex that assumes that it's supposed to replace HEX on Ethereum. And then there is another logic, which is that people are not just going to give up the Ethereum pair and that original token that created all the gains and all the millionaires, the hexagons. It's not just going to be forgotten because there is value on being on Ethereum. Ethereum is considered to be more liquid, more secure. It's more, let's say, the devil you know than the devil you don't when it comes to blockchain networks and when it comes to the ability to on and off ramp with fiat from those networks. So a lot of the larger players, let's say sharks, whales, even squid, you know, if you're talking about the ranking, the coin rankings, people who hold large amounts of a specific token like HEX and have provided liquidity for HEX in the past and continue to do so maybe on the Ethereum side, these people may have the inherent interest to remain active on the Ethereum side. And if they have mechanisms built that already use the Ethereum HEX, it doesn't allow for the idea of this just ceasing to exist all of a sudden because the hexagon community and those who understand everything about what Richard Hart has built have moved to the PulseChain side and have maybe decided to continue their DCAs or their regular purchasing of HEX, or maybe unstaking and building of new ladders and things like this. They want to do all this stuff now on the PulseChain side because they want to support PulseChain, and probably they sacrificed their HEX for Pulse, which means they're not as down as everybody else who was in HEX, maybe, you know, who wasn't as involved as people in the community were. So, look, there's a good argument about phex, which is the HEX that exists on PulseChain today, being the supreme asset, okay? The HEX as it's supposed to be on a chain that supports the original idea of HEX being democratized to the masses. There is a lot of sense to that, but the reality is that ehex is easier to buy, especially for new people into crypto, because people who come into crypto, they're always told to buy Bitcoin and Ethereum first. and that's the majority of new entrants into the crypto sphere, let's say. And those who come in through the smaller communities are driven by where those communities launch their tokens. So it would make sense to assume that most of those tokens are still being created on Ethereum today, and most new onboards into the crypto sphere are onboarded either into Bitcoin and Ethereum because they're larger players, or they're people who found out about Bitcoin and Ethereum or crypto in general by themselves. And then the other segment of people that gets onboarded as new entrants into the crypto market, they come mostly from other developers who are building mostly on Ethereum and on Binance Chain, and there's other chains, but they're irrelevant, guys. There are metrics out there that show us that the amount of new tokens launching per day on Ethereum is just way larger than all the other chains combined. As far as projects that have liquidity pools on Uniswap, on DEX, is easy to buy, very easy to access. Then you have Binance Chain, which has PancakeSwap, which is nowhere near as popular as Uniswap, and does not have the amount of new onboards as the Uniswap communities have, because those onboards in the Binance Chain tend to be kind of very difficult to understand where they're coming from. Are they real? They're very tiny. There's a lot of scam coins on Binance Chain. Let's just put it that way. There's a lot of scam coins everywhere, but I mean, on Binance Chain, the amount of scam coins launching daily is the far majority of what is actually being built on Binance Chain. Whereas on Ethereum, there are a lot of real projects that get built, and there are a lot of fake projects, like projects that don't really have too much utility or longevity, let's say. Okay, so the point of all of this explanation about where new coins are created is that's where new members of crypto users come from. Either projects that have teams or founders that are onboarding new people into blockchain, telling them to come and either buy Ethereum and then buy their token because it's on Ethereum, or if they're going to build on PulseChain, that's great. That's another video. We'll be talking about something related to that, which is how the community hasn't been as hospitable or as warm as it should be in bringing new developers into PulseChain, because we'll talk about that on a different video. We are discussing the difference between ehex and phex, and we have concluded here that although phex may have the design capabilities of the original vision of Richard Hart for hex, and that it's easier to convince somebody to come in for a fraction of the price per trade and the entry fee. But does $50 or $100 really matter when you're convincing larger investors to come in? I don't know, guys. I mean, I've personally onboarded many people into hex, and to most of those people, it really didn't matter too much if they have to pay $100 to get in, or whatever amount they have to pay. As far as, is it cheaper for them to ladder in and out? The people who should be onboarded into hex should already know that this is something that you buy and stake and you collect fees from, and you can then keep laddering those stakes back into further stakes so that you can keep making the high ROI. Or if you don't really believe in the long-term value of hex and what it was designed to do, if let's say you were to create a 7-year staking ladder or a 5-year staking ladder, it goes up to 15 years. And the average is 6 or 7. So I say 6 or 7 is because it's not such a bad idea to discuss an investment of 6 or 7 years in an industry where cycles are 3 to 4 years, where you shouldn't really cash out if you're not planning to hold at least that amount of time. So it makes a lot of sense to talk about it that way, because depending on when you're coming into the cycle and when your stakes would be ending, you can kind of plan to keep the rhythm of what's been happening in these cycles. And if you want to do that, it's probably more favorable for you to do it on PulseChain and use phex. But for people who just want to get a small taste of hex and who don't know about PulseChain yet, it would be much easier to say, go buy some hex on Uniswap, because when you go on Uniswap and you buy hex, you get ehex, and you don't have to bridge and you don't have to do anything, and it's easier. And then when the floodgates open in the bull market, it's going to make a major difference on which chain you're on, and Ethereum will probably just see exponentially higher amount of new entrants in the bull run. So keep that in mind. And also, when you want to cash out, probably the liquidity that is needed, if you have large dollar values to cash out, would be kind of closer to the fiat on ramp on Ethereum as far as right now is concerned. Maybe in the near future, and it will be solved for PulseChain as well, with many on ramps and off ramps. But right now, as it stands right now, PulseChain doesn't have all this. Okay, so bigger players are scared to have too many millions on PulseChain. You can't cash out most of it at the time where euphoria starts to kick in and the prices get really high. The numbers can drop very quickly when people start to cash out large amounts, and at least that's the perception. So I think there's a very good reason why ehex should see the same, or even more success over the longer period. In the short period, I think the fact that the entire community who understands PulseChain and Richard's original vision and all that, they probably all moved to phex, and definitely there's an obvious telltale in the charts right now that we see that, look, the community that believes in these tokens has already chosen PulseChain, but the new guys may not choose PulseChain. So let's encourage HEX wherever it may be. If those who don't yet understand PulseChain want to start out on Ethereum, and then if they believe in HEX, they want to continue building stakes, they would be encouraged to look at PulseChain naturally by themselves. So I think Ethereum is definitely very important. It's just like any other chain or L1 that wants to launch, or app that wants to launch, should have a token on Ethereum, because it's easier to buy, it's easier to sell. People just go on Uniswap or 1inch and they want to buy a token. If you're not there, you're pretty much nowhere. I don't really see any kind of reasoning that says you can have a token that is not on Uniswap be independently successful. It's very tough to say that right now, still, as it is today. Now, PulseX may change that. That's the DEX that's on PulseChain, because like I said, the community that believes in the Richard Hart vision has moved there and is supporting the PulseChain and PulseX. I'm definitely one of those people, and I will continue to support PulseChain and PulseX, but I will also continue to support ehex, because it is the original protocol. It's a protocol. It's on its own. It exists on Ethereum, and it is HEX. And just because there's a more efficient HEX that was built on the chain by the same founder of HEX doesn't mean that one's going to do better. That one has its own community. Ethereum has its own vibrant community, and we should embrace both HEX, in my opinion. Not financial advice. Like, dislike, tell me what you think. Let's talk about this more. But I said I would go into more of what I think about the ehex and phex stuff. I don't like that the community is arguing about it. I think it's good for publicity and stuff like that, but it also makes outsiders look at us and say, well, these guys don't really agree on their own stuff, so I don't know if I want to look at this further. It seems like you've got a lot to figure out. It's okay to have all these debates and stuff and different opinions, but people they get sidetracked by any of these things. So let's just get back to basics. The HEX protocol, no matter which chain it's on, it only matters because at what price it's at on that chain, and it only matters if that chain itself has any community behind it. So Ethereum has the largest, most active, strongest everything right now. PulseChain has Richard Hart and the RH community supporters like Hexicans, Pulsians, Pulsexians, so there's no doubt that HEX has value on both chains. Which one should be the one, or there is no such thing. It's whatever you feel more comfortable on. This has been too long of a rant, so I'm gonna cut it off here. And yeah, like, subscribe,